Amazing. Hey, Spence.
What's up, Addie?
Welcome to the Where the Climate Things Are podcast. Thank you so much for being on.
I am so thrilled to be here. Thanks for asking me to join.
Of course, of course. Firstly, can you introduce yourself to those that do not know who you are? Who is Spencer Fields?
Oh my gosh. So, Spencer Fields, nice to meet you. I am an electrification expert. I've worn a bunch of different hats within the energy industry over the last dozen years or so, but actually just recently changed jobs within the energy industry. So for the last 7 years, 6.5 years, I was at Energy Sage, which is the country's largest online marketplace for clean energy comparison shopping, and was there as we moved from 35 people to 135 people. So got a chance to wear a bunch of different hats while I was there specifically. And then now I'm at a new climate tech startup that's in the energy management space, which we can talk a little bit more about moving forward.
We definitely will. I will get to that. And also, tell me a little bit before I ask you kind of the first question I ask guests. Tell me a little bit about who you are as someone in the outdoors. Like, what
Yeah,
recreation do you love to do? Because I feel like this is something that, like, of how like we met and became friends even in the first place. Like, who are you as an outdoor recreationalist too?
absolutely. These days, I am through and through a weekend warrior, primarily skiing and climbing, seasonally dependent. But before I got my first full-time sit-down job, I was an outdoor educator leading trips for adventure treks, all multi-week, multi-sport trips for teenagers all throughout the U.S. and Canada, which was a ton of fun and a really great intro to a lot of different things and a lot of different sports. But that's what ultimately got me into climbing in particular, which I know we did a lot of together. And yeah, these days more so 9 to 5 track, and then getting out for morning laps at the local hill when I can and things like that.
I mean, I think that's a lot of people listening. So it's very, very relatable. And I know we'll dive into more about how you kind of divide your time and make it all work. But um, amazing. I also am like, oh gosh, a sit down job. That's also so interesting because I'm like, yeah, we both kind of went in that direction in our careers. But like, again, I love that so many people listening or folks in the outdoor space, it's like they've never had one of those. And I love that. And like a lot of folks in climate also maybe have never had one of those because their jobs require kind of being on your feet and in the world in a certain way, which is so cool. But so the question I wanted to lead off with, aside from learning more about you and your introduction, is what was your aha moment on climate? And I'm so excited to hear your response to this because I've known. So also, like, we should let folks know I've known you for. Mm,
It
I
was
don't actually want to
2008.
say.
I think it
Yeah,
was
let's not
2008.
say it. No, we can just
Yeah,
move
don't do the
on.
math. Yeah.
Yeah, no math, but we went to college, undergrad together, and so I have known you for so long, and so I am so curious, knowing you as someone who's been in environment since then, in college at that time. What was your aha moment on this topic?
You know, I've been thinking about this. Thank you for having episodes up already that I could listen to that were wonderful, where I could figure out what questions I was going to be asked,
Yeah,
uh,
exactly.
and also providing me some. But I've been thinking about this since you first presented it, and I don't know that there's explicitly an aha moment, but I do have this very vivid memory of being at a high school graduation party and talking to someone's parent or aunt or relative or something, and I'd been to dozens of these at this point, and the sort of small talk conversations had gotten so rote. And somebody had asked, oh, what are you going to go to study in college? And for the most part, I said, I don't really know. We were both at Brown, which has this wonderful open curriculum, so I'm going to try to figure it out and, throw a bunch of stuff at the wall and see what sticks. And for some reason, on that one day, I said, I'm going to go study environmental studies, or like, I'm going to go be in climate or something along those lines. And
Wow.
that was the first that I'd vocalized it, even to myself, right? Like maybe it had been sort of percolating for a little while, but that was the first that I said it out loud. And once I did, it kind of just stuck. And so, I got the course catalog and I signed up for ES11 with Caroline Karp, and took that initial intro to environmental studies and environmental sciences class and kind of never looked back.
That's so wild because I feel like we met and I was like, ah, the environmental guy, Spencer. Like, you know how you sort of like meet all these folks, like, day one or week one, month one, and you're like, oh, that person does this and that person does this. Not to put people in boxes, but like, I really did feel like that was kind of how I like came to know you, was in that way, in that space,
And you're
which is
so
so
right. And
cool.
so much of it, that was such an important piece of how I defined my identity at Brown was as somebody who's an environmental studies major. And it kind of the first instance of me feeling like I actually vocalized that was almost on a whim. And so it's so funny to sort of look
So
back at that
interesting.
and
Yeah.
be like, I have no idea what caused me to say that on that specific day, but that's I guess what got me here.
And here we are now, many
Here we
years
are now.
later. Well,
Yeah.
we'll get into a little bit more about kind of how the climate space has changed, because I'm so curious for your take on that. As again, someone that's been in this space for quite a while, but not quite yet. That was a preview. So I was curious if we could talk a little bit more about. You mentioned you just changed jobs. You also gave us a little bit of a sense of what both companies do. But can we just, would love to hear about your role at Energy Sage. You were there for quite some time, and we've obviously talked throughout those years, but a little more around like kind of what your role was there, and how you were engaging even like consumers and the public on this topic, and then also more about what you do now, which I know is very new. So we don't
Super
have to
new.
get too much into that, but of course,
Would love to
as
though.
much as you want. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So at Energy Sage, I was on the marketing team for, 6.5 years, and we primarily tried to communicate with consumers from an education first perspective, right? We were always thinking about, it was a business, so we were thinking about consumer demand generation, but we were thinking about it from the perspective of, well, we're going to try to educate people first. And when they're ready to shop, we're going to provide them an avenue to do just that. And so that
And as
was
a
kind of the
reminder, we're shopping for solar. Is
primarily
that
solar. Yeah, thank you
solar?
for the
Okay.
clarification.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So it started when I started, it was just solar, and Energy Sage has expanded to other electrification products for your home, for your business. But yeah, the idea was solar. And so what's really interesting about solar is, 2018, when I joined the team, there were probably maybe 2 million homes in the US with solar on them at the time. Now we're up over 5 million homes with solar on them. And by the end of this decade, the leading industry association in solar is anticipating that we're going to double that again. So we're going to get to 10 million homes with solar in the US by the end of the decade, which is pretty remarkable growth. It's also a massive investment in a really big purchase. It's one of the most impactful things you can do in your own personal life from an emissions reduction perspective, from an environmental impact perspective, but it also costs a boatload of money. And so trying to help educate people around what their options were, um, trying to demystify products and brands that are brand new, right? Like if you are out shopping for a car and you say, oh, I'm looking for a Kia versus a Lexus, somebody's going to have an idea of what the price points are sort of relative to each other. But if you come to somebody and say, oh, I'm looking for an REC solar panel versus a SunPower solar panel versus, Jaw Solar, like nobody's going to have any idea, right? And so trying to educate people about this realm that really was just sort of a blank open space, blank page in their sort of understanding. And so um, yeah, we started with education first and kind of moved from there into shopping and decision making support and things like that. And yeah, while I was at Energy Sage, had an opportunity to do a bunch of different stuff, a lot of really cool stuff within the team and sort of externally facing as well. And so it went from being one of the people who was writing those content pieces, those educational content pieces. I had a background in energy consulting and environmental consulting. And so I was often writing a Spencer piece was something that was like, tell me about time of use electricity rates, something like that. And trying to sort of to communicate complex topics to homeowners primarily. And then, got an opportunity to work directly with a lot of the biggest brands and manufacturers and financiers in the space, in the solar and solar adjacent industries to figure out partnerships. Um, we were acquired by Schneider Electric and got an opportunity to work with a bunch of different teams within Schneider Electric to figure out where we fit and to drive synergies, everybody's favorite word. I had an opportunity to try to figure out what the approach to providing a similar service to non-residential properties, so primarily small to mid-sized businesses would look like. And then most recently was really in an electrification expert role, and so sort of a thought leader in the space, and both internally and externally. So um, it was quite a ride, and pretty varied in terms of all of the different yeah, hats that I had an opportunity to wear.
That's so, I mean, we're going to get into like, I want to ask you so many questions about tax incentives or lack thereof. I mean, you mentioned solar is very expensive. We'll get into all that. I wanted to, before I also ask more about your new job, I wanted to ask you, I think like the communications piece is so interesting around climate. Clearly I'm very passionate about that. Like that is part of this project, right? Is to talk more about climate and about solutions oriented, action oriented pieces to, how do we get involved in climate. And you said something before we started recording, which I'll reference now, which is sort of like people are starting to move to understand that it's not, it's all well and good to know it's happening, but like, where's the action piece? And I think, so, something that you just said really stood out around like one of the, I'm going to misquote you, but like one of the most important, impactful things someone can do is actually like install solar, or like there's very like there's some very tangible actions in a world and in a topic that feels very intangible. And so I think I appreciate it as someone who would consume your videos and your comms pieces, that you really try to meet people where they're at and just sort of demystify, right? Like, what are all these, you mentioned like synergies and all our favorite terms, but like, what does it mean to kind of break it down into like regular plain language? And I just think it's so interesting because I always think about the like what's in it for me, what's in it for
Totally.
me. And I don't mean to sound transactional, but it's also like it is a little bit, right? It's like, I mean, in a
You
lot
don't
of
stay
different
in
environmental
business if
projects,
if you aren't
right,
transacting
right,
though.
right,
Yeah.
right, right. So it's like, I mean, I'm just curious, like how you found that, like what were some of the the strategies or just the approaches you used to like really meet people where they were at and communicate plainly.
Yeah, it's it's interesting because where people are at is evolving rapidly, certainly. Um, but then, like you were saying, people's understanding of and sort of baseline level of understanding of environmental issues, of climate tech, of clean tech is also evolving really rapidly, almost as fast and as rapidly as this technology is sort of evolving. And so uh, I know before we started hit the record button, we were talking about just how within our friend groups, so many people have such a high level of understanding and curiosity around clean tech products, whether that's heat pumps or electric vehicles or solar for your home, or what about in multifamily? What are the sort of uh, the types of populations that have proven harder to access from a clean energy adoption perspective, and making all of these products more accessible. And so it's um, yeah, where you meet people and how you communicate people is a tricky thing. Sort of where I think about it is we were always running consumer research to try to understand the state of today's energy shoppers, electrification shoppers. And so the first thing that we always wanted to know was, how can we gauge your interest in electrification? How can we gauge your awareness of electrification? And how can we gauge what are going to be the drivers or potential barriers to adoption of this technology, right? Because to your point, we're very in the weeds of like, and I'm going to get there by talking about the smart circuit breakers, right? Like that's as in the weeds as you can get from a product or a company perspective. But like I'm very in the weeds of saying, well, what's the difference between this type of panel manufacturing, heterojunction technology versus TOPCon manufacturing of solar panels? It's like nobody cares, right? Like ultimately they want to know how this is going to work. And when you ask people about what it is that drives their interest in adoption of clean energy technology or electrification technology, and when I say electrification, that's solar panels, heat pumps, potentially batteries for backup for your home, electric vehicles. It's taking anything that's currently fossil powered and making it electric, primarily in your home, but sort of in your life as a whole. And when we ask people why they're interested in those things, most people say that they're interested in those products because it'll save them money. And then we say, why is it that you're going to adopt them? And they say, because it's going to save me money. And then we say, what would be the biggest barrier to adoption? And they say, because it costs too much money, which is this very sort of interesting, almost waterfall or trickle sort of effect. But for most people, the environmental impact of that purchase or that purchase decision is secondary. That's not true for everybody, right? There are different personas, there are different types of buyers, there are different types of homeowners, and that's true sort of within generations or across generations. But for the most part, to paint in super broad strokes, people are interested in this stuff because it's going to save them money. And so, how do you resonate? How do you make technology, or how do you make new technology, or how do you make incentives resonate with the people who are ultimately out trying to shop for these products? Well, you talk about how it's going to help them save money. And you talk about, like, right, well, if you adopt this, it's going to reduce your energy usage and we're going to save you 10% on your annual electricity bills. Or if you adopt solar, we can, reduce or eliminate your electricity bill entirely, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that was sort of always the approach to like communication, is like, okay, broad strokes, I want to make sure that you have all of the evidence that you need to feel fully educated, but also what makes me feel fully educated about something is going to be different than how you make a decision about what you're purchasing, and so on. And so that, yeah, I think that's sort of what informed our communication, and sort of, yeah.
How you get that across? No, I think like makes so much sense. I think the thing that's, I mean, like I actually, folks might not know, but like I studied development, international development, social enterprise, right? There's like all this literature studies around how like when you create sustainable business models, or like choices that make good business sense for folks, right? It's like that's what people are going to, that's what's going to change behaviors. And I'm sure there's people listening, or who want to have this conversation in a way that's like, no, it's just like if the incentive structure is like just doing something for the environment, that's all well and good. I have like really strong feelings that you need to like give folks who are changing their behaviors an incentive to change their behaviors, and that incentive a lot of times is going to be cost saving, and lowering the barrier to like the cost barrier to getting into
Correct.
something like electrification. So
Correct.
interesting. Before we get into like all the nerdy questions, I want to ask you about tax incentives and those cost barrier
Yeah.
lowering structures. I want to also kind of paint the full picture of Spencer and get to know a little bit more around like your background. Like, I mean, I asked this a little bit in the beginning, but just sort of like I feel like when we met, we really bonded over a love of the outdoors and a love of natural spaces. And I wondered like both, yeah, sure, we know now that you're a climber, a skier, a trip leader, but like I wonder how, as we start to have these conversations on this podcast, I realize like there's so many folks who are in the outdoor space in some way, whether they're a weekend warrior or I love that I'm sitting in nature as this
It's
podcast is
so
happening too. It
fantastic.
kind of
It's
makes
so good.
sense, right? I just wonder, you know, if you can talk, knowing like who this audience is, talk a little bit more too about like your love of the outdoors as both a recreationalist, and then also like how you bring that in. Hopefully, that's not too much of a leading question, but like if you bring that in to your day to day work on environment and energy.
Totally. The one of my favorite quotes is from Tommy Caldwell, and it was something that I heard in an interview that he gave while he was on his book tour for The Push, which is phenomenal. And he said, "You have to feed your own ambition if you're going to have anything else to give anybody else." Something along those lines. But basically, the point is, you have to know what refuels your own tanks, and you have to know how to feed your own ambition outside of work in order to be able to show up energized and as sort of complete as you can to your family, to your friends, to work, you name it. And that's really how I think about outdoor adventures or experiences. I can think of the sensation of being on a backcountry ski hut trip in British Columbia with friends 3 years ago and still use that to fuel my energy today. And I think you can get you have to figure out what types of moments you can find to recharge those batteries, um, to mix my energy metaphors. But for me, whether it's a quick a quick uphill lap um, at the local ski resort and just get 1,000 vertical feet on a morning before going to work, just to try to get some exercise, spend some time outside, but really just to sort of feed that own ambition. And so, I grew up with um, I grew up actually being in the Boy Scouts, and that was sort of my main path to
I
be
forgot
outdoors
that. Yeah.
growing up. Yeah. Um, and then also being a student at Adventure Treks, where I later led trips. And that experience was a really interesting one because it was structured, but there were enough unstructured moments, and there was sort of oversight, but I was had enough independence as a kid growing up in Boy Scouts, where it was like, this is my thing, and I'm gonna go as far with it as I take it, and I'm going to get as much out of it as I put into it. And I think that sort of experience really helped to grow my love of the outdoors, both in terms of the amount of time that I spent camping all throughout Western Pennsylvania, which is a underrated part of the country, but also in terms of really being you know, one of the areas in my life where I had an opportunity to like do something for myself, right? Like in school, you're doing stuff, but it's, whatever, you're chasing a grade or you're doing it because somebody else tells you to do it. Same thing in a lot of ways with athletics, and Boy Scouts for me was that one thing where it was like, I could quit tomorrow and nobody would, like, my parents would be like, okay, or I could become an Eagle Scout and they'd be like, that's great, and like be very, very supportive of the decisions and the choices and the effort that I put in either way. And so I think that to me is part of what I always think about when I'm outside, is it's like, this is a decision that I'm making, right? Like, if you're going to go and meet up with somebody and you have your sort of accountability buddy to go get out for whatever adventure that you're going on, whether it's going on a trail run or going to get in a couple laps, or if it's going out for a climb or just meeting at the climbing gym, like, you have to you have to show up. And because you have to show up, you have to really want to show up, and you have to know that it's going to provide that level of energy. And that's just kind of always been the case for me.
Totally. I love that. I want to I want to go find that Tommy Caldwell quote slash link to it
I
here
know
if
I
we
know exactly
can.
where it is. It
Yeah.
was a very funny cross section of my interests. He was on the Men in Blazers podcast, which is like two British dudes talking about soccer. And I don't know, like, whose booking agent said you should really
That's
talk about this
incredible.
book. But
Yeah.
yeah, Roger Bennett interviewed Tommy Caldwell about the push while he was on his book tour, and it's amazing. So it's somewhere in the Men in Blazers archive.
Well, we will uncover it for sure. Because I love that quote though. I love that ethos of that, what you said of like, it's the whole. I mean, I feel like this got thrown around a lot in COVID, but the like put your own, what is it? Put your own oxygen mask on before helping others, kind of thing. Like we have to be able to refuel our tank. To your point, I love the I love the energy metaphors sprinkled in all of these.
I know,
Refuel,
and they're a
recharge your
mix of like
battery.
they're a
Yeah,
mix
and now
of
I'm just
like
like, wait, that was fossil fuels.
incumbent
Yeah.
technology, fossil refill your tank versus recharge your battery. I'll get better at
Yeah,
doing more of
yeah. We'll
the
we'll
clean
figure it out
energy
as we
ones.
go.
Yeah,
But I do think it's real, and I think I mean I actually want to do more. I may, end up doing a post or something, Substack or whatever on this, where I want to go in more to like, because I feel like I reference this book literally every podcast, but Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson just wrote What If We Get It Right? There's a piece in there, and I've seen it kind of show up other places where folks are sort of like connecting the dots between those that spend a lot of time in the outdoors. And obviously, there's a lot we could talk about around privilege and access and, the ability to be in the outdoors and to refill our cups in the outdoors in that way. But I know that there are also studies, which I am like always referencing these and then need to like really find where they are, but about like those that spend time in green space, sort of like spending time in green spaces or kind of access to nature actually deepens your own commitment to conservation, commitment to work in this space. And so there's this interesting link between like those that spend a lot of time outside, which is also like the thesis of this podcast, admittedly, but like those that spend time in nature and then go work on, maybe it's not, I mean, you work in a space that I don't think people would necessarily immediately be like, like nature, like that is like environment. And you're like, no, that's exactly what that is. It's just coming at the climate issue from an amazingly efficient and helpful angle. And it's so interesting that like one of the ways that you recharge your batteries is by being in the outdoors. And so that's again like, this is sort of one conversation. Our conversation will be one of hopefully many on this podcast where there's that connection between like folks that work in the space and that are very, very close to nature in one way or another, whether it's laps or trail running, like being outside is important to them.
And it's I think part of it is that it's if you are somebody who spends a lot of time outside, it's unavoidable that the climate has changed. It's not that it is still changing, but it's unavoidable that change has already begun. And I think also if you're the type of person who's spending a lot of time outside, you are the type of person who is, like we were just talking about, like gonna do something. You're the type of person who's like, I'm gonna go out for a trail run. I'm gonna go out, be outside. I'm gonna go out for a hike. I'm gonna go out for a climb. And anytime that you take that initiation energy and make that decision and actually go show up outside, you're doing something. And I think that translates a lot, again, to the thesis of this podcast, that translates a lot to like, now, okay, well, how can we actually go take environmental action? Right. And to your point, there is a question of access. There is a question of, um, certainly with all of the clean energy technologies I've been talking about, like affordability is a massive, massive issue. And so when you start to look at that cross section of people who are spending time outside and potentially are affluent enough to spend time outside in whatever context that means, or they take that, um, the naturally and necessarily, I think that that sort of overlap of the population are going to be the people who then are able to take climate action um, from a by purchasing something that's like a really large
From a
investment.
financial way. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
but
exactly.
there's this really great line from your other podcast, Trailhead, from I think from your interview with Patagonia, and I'm
Oh my God, I
pretty
love that
sure
you're quoting this. This is
it's
so cool.
oh my god, it was so great. And I remember Carrie and I were listening to this while driving from like southwest Utah to like to the airport to fly out. Anyways, so we were like in that like brief stretch of Arizona where you're like dropping thousands of feet at elevation through these red rock canyons and listening to this episode. Anyways, and the point of the episode was, what does it mean to get outside? Or that's one of the like major topics that you covered in that
Yeah.
episode. And I forget at what point or who it was who said it, but there's a point about like sometimes you sort of have to reframe what it means to be getting outside. And for me, having grown up where it's like, if I'm hiking, a hike means a multi-day backpack, right? Like if it's something less than that, I call it a day hike, and it better be a charge. Like we better be going out trying to do something. Now that's like, you know, I don't want to admit the last time that I went backpacking, but it's been a long time, right? And I think you have to, but the point from that conversation was like sometimes just getting to the trail is success. And sometimes
Hell
just
yeah.
walking 100 yards up the trail and sitting down and being in nature is success. And that is what it means to be outside. And I think that resonates a lot as well with climate and energy. And like, you have to reframe that environmentalism is not perfection, right? And I think on your first episode with Dakota Jones, I think he said something similar, like you don't have to be perfect to be an environmentalist. Um, you have to figure out what works for you, and you have to figure out like how to do that, and you have to sort of draw your own fences around the Torah, as we say in Judaism, appropriately, to say like, this is what, like, I'm not going to necessarily do everything absolutely perfectly, but I am. This is how I'm going to interpret what it means to be an environmentalist for me, the same way that I would interpret what it means to be outside for me today versus me 10 years ago.
I love that. And folks are going to think I planted your, like, A, listening to these episodes at all and then quoting them, but I did not. That is amazing. And I think, I mean, I so appreciate that. We have had that theme throughout a lot of Trail Ahead. The other podcast that I co-host is, about this sense of equity, access, representation in outdoor spaces, and there's a massive overlap, Venn diagram, whatever you will, on with the theme of how do we diversify and enhance the climate conversation from multiple different angles. And I love that reframe that you just made around like, what does it mean to be in the outdoors? Because it's so true. Like even what you just said about like, if it's not this, we're charging, we're summiting, we're blah blah blah. And it's like there's so much. I mean, okay, we won't get too much into this because then we'll go down like it will be a trailhead episode, which would be amazing. But like there's so much sort of like um conquering language right around like the outdoors and our
Yes.
relationship to nature.
Yes.
And even I even think I actually do think it's paralleled to what I've heard starting to come up in like the climate fight and like
Yes.
the like crisis. It is a crisis definitely, but there's like really interesting sort of intense
Language
language.
choices.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think that's one of the reasons that like I want to like I love when there's you've already said it, like climate action, taking climate action or climate solutions. Like there's even in the language that we use and the word choice, there's a way that we can reframe our relationship to like the way that it's how our involvement like deepens, or even just how we are in this space. Because I think that like the second that it becomes, I've even used it before too, where I'm like, well, in this fight, like we're in the climate fight or whatever, and I'm like, wow, that's like quite violent, right? Like that's like, oh, that's so interesting. And then I kind of
Correct.
think about it in the same way of like, like conquering a peak or tagging a summit, and you're kind of like, oh, that's interesting. Like it's like very like kind of like that like colonial language even. Like so, it's so interesting how we've brought that in. Yeah, go ahead. I'm like,
No,
this is
exactly.
I
Well, and
want to
it's
geek
also, we
out
were
on this
talking
with you.
about being very transactional and having very transactional relationships with like people or things. Like talking about tagging a peak is a very transactional relationship with nature, right? And it's like, but that is the relationship to which I subscribed for like, my childhood. And there's probably something to dive into about Boy Scouts there, but like that was like, it was, oh, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do it, right? Like whether it's uh, whether it's tagging a peak, whether it's skiing a thing, a line, whatever, like climbing a line, like it
Right.
had to be,
We're gonna check it off.
yeah, it was a tick
Yeah.
list. I was checking
Yeah.
something off the list, right? Whereas now it's like I am up outside, right? And trying to understand again where it is that I can find the energy to recharge. And
Another energy
recognizing
metaphor.
another energy metaphor. But this time I
No, but it's
actually,
real.
it was the same one,
You did that.
and
That was
and
good. Yeah.
there
Yeah.
was intentional. But like, I remember distinctly I had a day last year where I it was, I think, late December, early January, and it was the biggest snow of the year that we got in the part of Massachusetts that I live in. And a couple friends and I went to our local mountain, Wachusett, and it's very much like an urban, or like uh, the place that people from Boston go to ski, right? Or to learn to ski. But before the lift starts spinning, you can skin up it, and it is peaceful and beautiful and quiet and phenomenal. And on this particular day, it had snowed, whatever, a foot and a half, and we got there, and there was this great community of people who were going uphill before the lift started spinning, and we got in a couple of laps, and we were skiing it, and I was like, this is probably going to be the best snow that I ski this year, and these are probably going to be like the smoothest, softest turns that I get to make this season, and that's okay. And that moment for me was, I think, a very important point on my like outdoors journey of being able to accept, you know what, this is what it means for me to be outdoors now. Now, did I, get a couple of nice days after that? I sure did. But at the time, being able to sort of be, it made me more present in the experience. It made me more accepting of the experience in a way where, had we been, talking to 22-year-old me, I would have been like, I have to do as many laps as possible before the lifts. I'm going to get there at 4 and I'm going to ski, a dozen lap, whatever. And it's just, you have to, yeah, you're sort of,
Totally.
yeah, your
I mean,
sense of what it means
it
to be
has to
outdoors
change.
change. It has to
Yeah, and
change.
I
Has to
think like
change.
getting back to what you said, like the Dakota quote is great. It's like you don't have to be, there's like many rabbit holes I want to go down with this with different guests and conversations in the future of like what does it mean to be an environmentalist, a climate actor, taking climate action, and like how that also is it like kind of necessarily imperfect. There's sort of this interesting thing about imperfection where you're like, of course, like be as good as you can. Well, especially, again, to reference Trailhead, like especially in conversations in that regard around representation and equity. But at the same time, like in climate, it's so interesting because I feel like I've mentioned to you too before we hit record, like the fact that I do feel like I'm hosting this like almost like environmental ethics like podcast because it's
Yes.
like what are the we dive deep here on like well is it does it do any good to take like just any action or like is is sort of like is inaction better, like there are definitely places where it's like if you don't take an action, if you like don't step off the trail, I guess that's better for the trail kind of thing. But then there's also this interesting thing around like yeah, like what is there something to this idea of like, well, if I'm not going to be perfect, which Dakota says, if I'm not going to be perfect, I can't stand up like on a
Right.
stage and
Right.
say, hey, you all, you need to kind of like be take climate action. And so I think it's really interesting about these reframes because I've been having this myself. I mean, I had massive, even for this podcast, I'm like, currently, even now, I'm like always thinking about, I'm like I sort of know about this topic, like work in this topic, but like, who am I, right, to host these conversations? And I'm like, no, F that. We're going to keep it clean. F that. Like how, like, if we don't just go and do what, kind of that like whole climate Venn diagram, right? Of like,
Right.
what are we good at? What do we need? Right. It's like,
Yes.
I am not a PhD. I don't have the nearly the amount of background you have on these topics. And I could let that kind of stop me, but like this is kind of my way of contributing. So it's like sort of this
Totally.
interesting, like as we all find our spaces, and this goes back to that conversation about like a lot of our friends joining the climate and environment space, which that's kind of where I'm going with like my next question. But like our a lot of our friends have joined this space and they're all coming at it from really cool different angles. We have like entrepreneur friends who went to business school and then decided to like get into the heat pumps and electrification conversation. And you're like, wild. Like, I mean, myself, like I was referencing, I was like, I didn't really come into like the environmental space, if you will, until like I went to grad school, which was several years after we met. So it's sort of interesting to see like we need everyone. That was kind of my point, is like we need everybody from different angles to be involved in some way. It doesn't have to mean you've changed your job, right? But
No,
it's like,
totally.
yeah, it's interesting.
You're so spot on. I want to say one thing about the like action versus no action thing very quickly. And as you were saying that,
Please.
it almost feels like there's sort of two ends of the pendulum, like the climate pendulum. One is alarmist and one is defeatist. And like ultimately we need to be somewhere in the middle, right? Like we need to be really concerned, but we also need to actually be doing stuff. And
Yes. Yep.
I think the like not taking any action allows you to be defeatist, and taking any form of action is important. And like for years I would refuse to call myself an environmentalist because I occasionally eat red meat and I like to travel, right? And it's like well, can you truly be an environmentalist if like you're not sailing across the ocean like Greta Thunberg, right? Like I don't know. Or if you're not taking a cargo ship across the ocean, right? And like
Yeah, I was gonna say shout
um
out Dakota too.
you're right. uh which yeah. um there's there's this whole other story developing about how cargo ships have accidentally just like geoengineered the climate because they reduced, like, for some international protocols, we reduced the amount of sulfur that's sulfur content in the fuels that they're burning, but that
Whoa.
actually was increasing the albedo of like the atmosphere and was like helping to cool the earth, and then they took it out and we had more warming this year than we've like should otherwise expect. So anyways, cargo
Whoa.
ships, yeah, like
Cargo ships.
all of
Also
these
going to link to
weird,
that. That's
yeah,
interesting.
wild, right? um all of these sort of wheels within wheels, and so it's like you can't be perfect. You have to figure out what it is that makes sense for you and actually take those actions. And then I think once you get to the point of talking about like, um oh, but what I will say is it's important to understand the actions that you're taking, right? Like I think for so many years everybody's recycled, and you recycle something and then you send it away and it's like who knows what happens. I remember when we were in college, in one of the like first environmental studies classes I took, I learned that in Providence they won't recycle a bottle if the cap is on it, and I was outraged. I was like, why doesn't every
I
recycling
can,
bin at every in
wow.
every like meal hall, every place on campus have a sign that says like take the cap off your bottle before you put it in here, because it won't be recycled if you don't. Like that to me was mind-boggling, and it was just like this the smallest thing that took the slightest bit of digging to understand that, oh, in fact, this action that I'm taking isn't actually having the desired impact, right? And so I think it's worth doing enough, uh, taking enough time to educate yourself, or find people who are well informed on the subject who can help educate you about it, to know that the decision that you're making or the action that you're taking actually does have the impact that you are desiring, as opposed to just being like symbolic, right? um, that's also important. Yeah.
No, I was going to say, absolutely. I mean, that's, I can see, again, because I've known you for a long time, but I
It's
feel
like
like I can like
18-year-old
see
old me being
it,
just
literally what I was going to say.
irate.
And
Yes.
just being, and like writing like handwritten
Yeah.
signs and
Yeah.
like putting them
Yeah.
on a, recycling bin, which
In like
honestly,
cargo
we
pants
should
and
have.
flip-flops. Yeah.
Oh my God,
Yeah.
folks, we just learned, we just painted
There you
the
go.
picture of Spencer.
You've got the
That
full
literally
picture.
was maybe
That's
a
it.
guitar in hand, which we'll get to. But anyways,
That's true. Yeah, there's
okay,
one more
so
story. The
tell me about this. Okay, well, first of all, I have to just brag for you for a second as we're kind of like doing this throwback. Like you went to COP when you
Yes,
were okay, you went to COP 17. Is that right? Which was in what year?
2011.
2011,
It was
which
December of
made
2011.
us
21.
21 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so like that's first of all wild. I feel like that's sort of this, especially for someone who's so young to go to a COP that year. Like I remember hearing about that and being like, oh, I wonder what like COP stands for. Kind of like literally my first time ever hearing about that. Now I feel like that's all I hear about in the spaces I'm in. But I just like I kind of use that to anchor like this next question around like you've been in this space for so long. You've studied this. You've like some people, again, I kind of mentioned, like are coming in from different angles, or like they're finding it, they're like doing this kind of deep dive, whether it's like quarter life crisis, midlife, whatever it is, around like what am I doing for the planet, like what am I doing for this conversation. And you've been in this space for so long and have a different perspective. I'm just curious, like, yeah, like I mean, I want to ask like, how has the space changed? But then I'm almost like, was there a space, right? Like what? How have you seen this conversation shift over the years? So interested.
Totally. Yeah, I was at COP 17 in Durban, South Africa. Shout out to Timmins Roberts and the Climate Development Lab at Brown University, which is what made it happen. I uh, Upon returning, we were interviewed by the Brown Daily Herald to ask, what was the experience like, and I believe there was a quote in there where I said, I learned more in a week than I did in an entire semester of school. And but my parents were
Hey,
like,
that's amazing.
you can't do that.
Did
Like
they
you really,
publish that?
oh yeah. And I'm pretty, you can find it in the archives. And
I'm going to. That's so
and
funny.
and I don't remember if I ever talked to Timmons about it, but I like the Climate Dev Lab nearly didn't even get off the ground because of things that I said, or whatever.
Well,
But
I mean, I would
uh,
think that people would be like, "Oh, well, then I need to go study
then we
with
need to do
this
more of
lab.
this. Yeah,
Like, then we need to
I
do more of this." But I
there are
love
some.
that. I love that. That's so funny. I just remember being jealous that you went to South Africa
Yeah,
personally. I don't even
that
think
was
I
pretty
knew what
sweet.
you were going for. So
That
that
was pretty
shows how much
sweet.
I know.
I spent the whole time at the conference center. We had one day where we went to I think it was the aquarium in Durban, which is pretty cool. But there are a lot of really, really cool people in that group doing really, really cool work and research at Brown, and then afterwards, and some really interesting, you know, companies and newsletters and things that have been sort of born out of the people who were a part of that group after me. And so cool to feel like I was a part of that early on, and then look at everybody else's impressive accomplishments and be like, I'll claim at least 3% of that. But
Yeah, sure.
but yeah, so I went to college, studied environmental studies, and I graduated with a degree in environmental policy, right? And primarily in like international environmental policy. And where can you really work when you had a degree in international climate policy? And the answer was kind of nowhere.
What
And
year
and
was this? Like, give us
I
a
was
sense of years.
2012,
You might have said that.
but then
Okay.
I was
Yeah.
but then I was leading trips for Adventure Trek. So by the time I actually started looking
So
for jobs, it
20,
was really 2013,
which we support everyone. We
which we
support
support.
career exploration in all ways. Yes.
I
So
do have
2013.
2013. I do also have this like very vivid memory of being in Flat Rock, Hendersonville, North Carolina, working fall groups for Adventure Treks, and we would have a school group from somewhere in the region every week, Monday through Friday, and like Saturday, all of us would be at the like one cafe, and I forget if it was Flat Rock or Hendersonville, but it was just phenomenal. And they had this lovely outdoor space, and we were all there on our laptops or phones, like trying to apply to jobs. And we were all like, well, do we apply to more seasonal jobs for the winter, or do we try to like apply to a like 9 to 5 job, a sit
Do
down
we even
job?
want to
Like,
do
do we
this?
even
Because
want
we
to
are
do this?
trip
And
leading, and that's awesome.
every single week was an existential crisis. And so that like time and a place. Um, but yeah, like when I was looking for jobs, the only climate policy jobs were for people with at a minimum a master's, but more likely a PhD, and they were all for primarily like think tanks and research groups in the DC area. And that was like kind of it. Like that didn't it didn't really exist. And the first job that I ended up, the first like really full-time job outside of the internships that I had in DC that I got was working at a company called Synapse Energy Economics, which is a like clean energy consulting firm. And so they work for public interest research groups, providing environmental economic analyses of various policies. What's the impact of the Obama era Clean Power Plan going to be on each individual state and their emissions reductions and energy prices, things like that. Like we would be the ones who ran the electric sector production models and dispatch models to try to figure out if you push this lever or that button, like what will emissions be in 10 and 20 and 30 years, and what will electricity bills be in 10 and 20, 30 years, and what does that mean from a like build out of clean energy perspective. And so when I got that job, what was interesting about it is number one, there were only a handful of companies that were doing what Synapse was doing at that time, and most of them were sort of larger consulting firms that were then also, happen to have utility clients or whatever, and so we're playing in that space. Um, but like even then in 2013, 2015, even 2018, when I was making my transition over to Energy Sage, like there wasn't that much clean energy on the grid, and there weren't that many solar panels on people's homes. And so there was still this like we weren't even at the elbow of the hockey stick on adoption curves for all of these technologies. And I think since then, the explosion has been absolutely exponential in terms of just the options and the opportunities within the climate and clean energy space, right? Because as soon as you start doing one of these things, again, to the sort of wheels within wheels of like impact, once you install like, well, here, let's do it from like a consumer journey perspective.
Yes,
Oftentimes
please.
the first point of entry into like electrification or clean energy for your home is either a smart thermostat or some form of energy monitoring. And
Okay,
the
wait, and as
reason,
we go through this, because this was literally going to be my next question, like
yeah,
what folks can take like action
yes,
on.
yes,
Can we also do cost, if you would,
totally.
and if there are any incentives?
Yeah,
This is
yeah,
like
yeah.
this is so helpful. Okay,
No,
continue.
totally. So the first step most people take is either energy monitoring or a smart thermostat, or sometimes energy efficiency audits and upgrades to your home. So going in reverse, energy efficiency upgrades, a lot of states will actually provide free home energy audits, which will say like how efficient your home is. It will suggest upgrades to windows, weather stripping, lighting, other major appliances, things like that, and then we'll actually provide free insulation as well. So, for instance, that's
I
that's what we
wondered
have
about
in
that.
Massachusetts. Exactly. From a smart thermostat perspective, you can kind of go buy your own, either a Nest or an Ecobee. There are a couple of others as well. Honeywell has one. You can buy them from their websites or on Amazon or whatever. And it, depending upon when you get it and which type you get, it could be anywhere from like $50 to $300, right? The installation of it is DIY-able, but sometimes you'll want an HVAC contractor or an electrician to actually do that install. Energy management systems, a lot of utilities now will actually show you sort of your day-to-day breakout of energy consumption if you have something that's called a smart meter on the side of your house. The company that I just joined called Noble Carbon, where we're making smart energy or smart circuit breakers, a sort of a type of energy management product. That's an opportunity to now do it at the individual circuit level. There are products that do it at your whole main panel level, or that you can do it at a plug level. And depending upon the type of solution, it could be anywhere from, a couple $dozen for something that's giving you uh, insight into how much you're using on an individual plug, to several $1,000s for like a whole home sort of retrofit type of thing. Um, But what's really cool about these as like gateway products to clean energy is, for the most part, with a smart thermostat, you are seeing how your actions influence
Right.
your comfort and your bills. And so you can very quickly begin to link, like, if this then that. If I take this action, then my bill is reduced or my bill goes up, right? Um, and that then now feeds into other potential savings, because once you see those savings, then you go out and you say, oh well, how else can I save money? Like, where else am I spending on my utilities, and what are the ways to reduce those costs? And so you end up almost getting on this kind of flywheel of product adoption, because you just figured out that you can save money by taking action, and now you're like, wait, hold on, I want to save more money. And so the same thing kind of happened to the industry as a whole. Like, when I started at Energy Sage in 2018, the biggest trade show of the year was called Solar Power International, SPI. And it's a global show that takes place in the US every year. And the key products that were being promoted and displayed by manufacturers and whoever were solar panels, because it was called Solar Panel International. So it was solar panels and solar adjacent tech, or like the other technology that it takes to make a solar panel system actually work. So, racking, inverters, et cetera, wiring. And now it's called, they like switched from SPI to just calling it RE plus. And this year I was at it in September, and I might have seen like 3 solar panels. And this is like the solar industry's biggest trade show of the year, and everybody's showing EV chargers and smart thermostats and
Wow. Oh,
batteries and
interesting.
all of these other pieces of technology beyond just solar. And so I think, you asked about the way that the space or the industry has evolved. Part of it is there wasn't really much of a space in 2012, 2013. And then the other part is that like since 2016, 2018, maybe the like all of these types of products and all of these companies that provide services or that provide the individual products themselves have started to emerge and realized that they're all part of the same ecosystem. And so it went from like everybody playing sort of in their own silos to now everybody's playing in the same playground. And it's like, again, for a mixed metaphor. And yeah, oh, sandboxes. There you go. Everybody went from playing in their own
Perfect.
sandboxes to now playing in one giant sandbox. And I think that has just spurred innovation and so on and so forth. And so, you know, we've talked a bit about how people sort of are beginning to bring their own skill set to climate. And you talk about what is it that you
Yeah.
can do to like be a part of this industry, which is really funny for me as somebody who's been in the industry for a long time, and I look around and I'm like, oh, like my skills are that I'm in the clean tech industry. And then I look at like friends who are like, oh, I'm an entrepreneur. I've, co-founded other businesses in the past, or I've run businesses in the past, or I've, whatever the case is, who are interested in getting into the clean tech space and are beginning to get into the clean tech space. And it's like, oh, you have skills and now you're applying them to climate. I have climate and now I need to apply it to skills. And
No,
which is, which
your
is,
Venn diagram is like a circle. It's
it
just
is
one
it is
circle.
it
What are
is
you
a
good at?
circle.
What brings you joy? What do we need?
Yeah, it's
Clean
like
energy.
yeah,
I
climate,
love it.
that whole thing.
I love it.
And so it's just been so interesting to see people recognize that there's a need for them to be in the space, and then say, oh well, here's what I can bring to that space. Like, who is there anybody who needs that right now? And if not, like kind of try to elbow some space to be able to do that. That's true with like communicating as well, right? Like these are the types of stories that are
Yeah,
not being told by any of sort of the existing communicators in the space. So same deal.
absolutely. Absolutely. I love this. This is so helpful. I feel like I could ask you deeper, many, many, many questions about everything you just said in the process. And I wonder if like what we can do is link to something that either
Hmm.
you've done or Energy Sage or
Can do.
anything you've put out, that we can like explain. Cause I'm like, you're like, yeah, when you with the wiring and stuff. And I'm like, no, I don't know. Like, what is that? But we'll provide more information. Okay. I'm also looking at time and we have
Yes,
two very exciting questions left. The first, no, you know them both. Actually, don't worry. The first one is Spencer. This is like a little like bonus for those listening. Would you like to tell them about One Night Band?
absolutely, absolutely. So Addie and I played in a band together for a singular night in college. It went so well that we played one show, one individual show.
We only play one.
Yeah,
Didn't
that's
we
why we
like
called it
kind of
One Night
play
Band.
Spring Weekend though?
Yes, we did. That's right.
We like
That's
auditioned
right.
for Spring Weekend,
Yeah,
didn't get it.
that's correct. But then it's like, okay, well now you look back and you're like, well,
Uh,
Lawrence played Spring Weekends. That was the band, and they're like, whatever.
did
They
they get chosen as the
Yeah,
Brown students
yeah. I don't
that
think it was
got
that year,
selected?
but like it might have been that year. It might have been after we graduated. But like
My
they were the ones who played,
God.
who play, and then
Shout out Lawrence. I'm linking to them
shout
too.
out
They're so
Lawrence.
good.
Yes,
Yep.
the last time
Local
the
band.
last time we saw them,
High school.
they sold out this
They
like
like
brand
open
new
for the
five
Jonas
thousand.
Brothers. All
Yeah,
right.
we saw them opening
Yeah.
for the. I
Okay.
went to a Jonas
So
Brothers
maybe we
show
lost out to like
to watch
very
Lawrence.
yeah,
Incredible.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. That's what you yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
we just
yeah.
this may be more of an exposing
Yes,
podcast of your
exactly.
musical
You
taste.
said it wasn't going to be a hard hitting
Yeah. I know
question, but
this
here
is
we
a
are.
hard hitting podcast after all.
The
Yes, we were in a
the
band together. Well,
We
one of
were in
the
a band
things we
together,
yeah, well, one of the
and
things
we
we like
played.
bonded over was music
Yes, we played
when
a
we first met.
lot of music
Yeah.
together. We played a lot
Yeah.
of music together,
You learned a lot of
and
songs that I wrote. I learned a lot of songs you wrote.
that's correct. That's correct.
Yeah. It was
And
good.
we decided to play. Was it the Underground at
Yeah. Wow.
like
Yep.
Fonts when it was
That's
called
a
Fonts?
venue.
Yeah,
Yep.
is
Wow.
that what
These
it
are all
was?
names that like two
And
people are gonna know. But
yeah,
yeah, they're all
yeah, yeah,
venues on campus. Yeah.
yeah. And
It was a
and
great show.
it was a great show. Yeah,
Did
and
did we
we
have did we have Do we have violin? Like what do we have?
Jason
We
got
had
up and played violin on
Jason got up and
Bittersweet
played
Symphony.
violin. Oh
Yeah,
my god,
yeah,
you
yeah. And then we
guys!
played. I
I
think that was
can't
the only
believe
cover
we're
that we played. And
saying
then
this. Yeah,
otherwise, I
that
think
is.
we played like a set of some of your
Yeah,
songs
yeah.
and
Yeah, Addie Thompson and the One Night Band was literally
the
what
one
we
night
called
band
because it was a one night
because
band.
it was a band for one night.
It's a
Yeah,
great name. Okay, I hope
it
no one
was.
steals this name because it's so good.
We
Like
can bring
not
it
the Addie
back.
Thompson
We
part.
can bring it
We can bring
back.
it back. Oh,
It's
we
true.
also have since written songs together
We have. They're
about
about our
cats.
friends' cats.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so we
So
won't.
Doug and
That's
Anna,
like a
their
real B side
cats.
to this
Yeah.
podcast
Yeah.
episode.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
Those
because
videos
we
do
could also
exist.
nerd out and nostalgic, go down a nostalgic train. I will
What was the
also
Brown
pause us
singer
here.
songwriter? Oh,
Oh, yes.
you like started a
Oh
like a
my
Brown
God.
singer
Songwriters
songwriter. Was it
Association
called
of
like?
Singer-Songwriters
Yeah, it was like a
bass.
bass.
But people
Yes.
thought it was
Yes.
bass because no
Yes.
one knows that that's how you spell bass, the like instrument.
Correct.
Oh my God.
Correct.
That's a whole, I literally haven't thought of that
Yes.
organization.
Yeah.
What did we
Yeah.
do? Just like sit around and write songs? I can't even remember. I think we put on
I
a
think we like
concert.
I
I think we
think
put on a
did
concert one
we?
time.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
it
we
was
did.
like a relief concert. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, and we
What a time.
we
What a
did.
world.
We did. That was that was the one where Emma Watson got up and walked out in the middle of my set.
What? Oh my
Yeah.
God. Are we
Yeah.
exposing? Wait. Okay. I actually don't know this story, but
Yeah,
I'm going
yeah.
to ask you
No,
this
no, no.
story after
No, it
we
was like
stop recording because I don't even know where this is going to go.
it wasn't
What?
like in the middle of a song. It was like between songs, but it was like
Wait, she also came to your set, which is pretty cool. Wait, she came
yeah,
to our
yeah,
singer-songwriters event?
yeah, yeah.
Oh my God. Wait, I forgot this. Okay, that's like really cool. We should actually, I'm going to edit this so that we lead with that fact.
Okay, okay,
Like, hey
okay.
everybody, welcome to Where the Climate Things Are. Addie put on an event with Spencer playing the
In
event that
college.
Emma Watson was.
You also played the event. Yeah, don't sell yourself short.
I don't think I did.
Yeah.
I don't think I did because I think I was so
Really?
stressed about putting on the event. I'm almost positive I didn't play.
No
Yeah.
kidding.
Yeah, because it
But
was in
yeah,
like
it was in a
Solomon. It
big
was like a
yeah,
big
it was in a
one.
big yeah.
Yeah. Guys, we sold out a theater. It's fine. Okay, but in all seriousness, because we are like we've been on for so long, Spencer. This is
We
amazing.
have been
Thank you so
talking
much
for a
for all your
while.
time. The
Yes.
last question I'm going to ask is what I ask everyone also at the end of the podcast episode is what is your favorite solution? What is your favorite climate solution that it's not your own? And I'm putting air quotes around your own because you like sometimes I ask that and it makes a little more sense because it's like Dakota Jones started this thing called Footprints. It's his own thing. In this case, I'm asking about the now we've defined it as your circle instead of a Venn diagram. Like
Yes.
instead of,
Yes.
I mean, within clean energy, of course, but like maybe not Energy Sage, maybe not this new company that you're at. Like what are you seeing as a climate solution that you're like, that is cool. Like
Yes.
actually, I haven't admitted this, but one of them for me is kelp farming, which we can
Cool.
go into in a
Cool.
different
Cool.
episode. But yeah,
You
just to
got
give
it.
you a
You
sense of
got
like where I'm
yeah.
going with that. Yeah,
Yeah. Uh you should check out the folks over at Lofoten Seaweed and what they're doing
obviously
with
we'll do that. Does that mean this
phenomenal
is
seaweed
Norway?
salt.
Is this
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Norwegian?
yeah, yeah.
Okay,
So
will
we'll go
do.
there next. Yeah, yeah,
Perfect. Yeah, we
yeah.
need to do a site visit for this for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah, yeah. On location recording. I you know, I was trying to think about this, and there are so many cool technologies that are coming out and that are potentially game changing, that are on the rise, that could potentially revolutionize the way that we think about energy, produce it, consume it, you know, transmit and distribute it. Um, but I think that makes it easy to forget that the incumbent products that we have today and the technologies that we have today actually work, and they save money
yeah,
and they help the environment and they're great. Like so, you know, what products in climate clean tech am I most excited about? The classics. Like, you know, existing electrification technologies. Solar works. I've had solar on my roof for almost 5 years. We save so much money as a result of it. Heat pumps work. We have heat pumps in our house. It's so comfortable. You like don't hear them at all when they kick in. It also helps us save money, and it's nice to reduce our reliance on natural gas. You can also sort of remove your entire reliance on fossil heating. EVs, electric vehicles, are fun. right? Like they're getting more accessible, they're getting more affordable. The charging networks are getting much better and much more open access. But it's like the most fun cars I've ever driven have all been EVs, right? Like electric vehicles are great. And then when you start to stack and combine all these products so that now all of a sudden you are using your solar panels to fill your proverbial tank, but actually recharge your battery of your electric vehicle, like now you don't, uh, my wife has an EV. The other day I was like, it's crazy how much gas prices have come down. She's like, I couldn't tell you what a gas price is
Wow. Yeah.
because it doesn't matter,
What
right?
is that?
It
Yeah.
doesn't matter. She just fills up with the power from the sun, which is awesome. Um, and so I just want to give a shout out to the classics.
Love
There
that.
there are a lot of cool
Yeah.
technologies that are in development, but I would pick the classics.
I love that. I think that's a great, like, that's a, loud and clear message of like calling out the things that are already here, place you've worked in, the space you've worked in for a while. And that's what this is about too. Like, it doesn't have to be new. It doesn't have to be unheard of. And as you said, those might be coming down the way, but let's look at the classics. I mean, I'm so excited. First of all, thank you so much for all of this,
Yeah,
Spencer.
thanks for
I'm
having
so
me.
excited to link to all of these different things, resources, and pieces of information that you alluded to, because I think there's, like, for me as well, I'm so excited to go down this rabbit hole of like, yeah, what are the incentive structures in place? What are the, the cost reducing pieces to taking these actions? Because I think like this was a really helpful, very like sort of like, rubber to the road, like how do we actually go do this, and how do I make a difference, in my own home, kind of thing. And yeah, I'm just really appreciative for you like laying all that out, and also talking, going down memory lane and talking
So
about all these
good.
like pieces of just, just how long obviously we've known each other and talked about these things, but at the same time just illuminating for folks that like there are ways in. You don't have to be like you don't have to be in the space forever. There's so many ways to get involved. And if you're not, working in this space, or even necessarily like, yeah, wanting to change jobs or whatever, it's like you can still take action in your own life, which I think is really cool. So,
Exactly.
um, thank you so much for everything and for being on. And yeah, I'm excited to keep talking to you about all of this in the future.
Same to you, Addie. Great talking to you.